Okay, I will start. So hi everyone, my name's Kitty and I'm the Nature Programme Manager here at the Conservative Environment Network. Thank you all for joining us for this councillor webinar on litter and fly tipping. I'm delighted to be joined by an esteemed panel of guests to talk about the topic tonight. The webinar will function. I will give a few minutes, just a little preamble, then head over to our panelists who will each give a few minutes introduction. If you have any questions as our panelists are talking, do feel free to drop them into the chat or to the Q&A function, and then we can get to them after the introduction. So in terms of why litter and fly tipping, well, with the local elections only just over a month away, litter and fly tipping is regularly spoken to me, and I'm sure to the panelists here, as one of the most important environmental local issues that residents care about and that councillors want to tackle. And with that in mind, it's astounding really that these waste crimes cost over £1 billion each year for local authorities on crimes that, if tackled correctly and efficiently and creatively even, could save local authorities across the country time, energy, and resources. And not to mention that each piece of litter that does not go into the bin is a material resource that has been wasted rather than reused or recycled and kept in the loop. The Environment Act has gone some way to create a series of powers to tackle litter and fly tipping in England, which include introducing mandatory digital waste tracking, raising the cap on fixed penalty notices, allowing the police to seize vehicles on behalf of the Environment Agency, as well as countless other things, including for litter, the deposit return scheme that will incentivise consumers to return their drinks containers. However, there have been concerns that the council's ability to enforce these new measures extensively ranges across the country. Limited resources have meant that some councils issue less than one fine a week to litterers, with almost 17% issuing no fines at all across a given year. With this in mind, throughout the course of this webinar this evening, we hope to explore some other cost-effective measures that councils can implement locally to tackle littering that blights some streets and green spaces across our country. And with that, I will hand over to our first panelist, which is Mark Jenkinson. Mark is the MP for Workington and a beloved member of SEN's Parliamentary Caucus. And with that in mind, I'll hand over to you, Mark.
I'm not sure I'm not beloved sometimes when I start kicking up. But anyway, evening everybody. I'm Mark Jenkinson, the Member of Parliament for Workington, as Kitty says, candidate for the new Penrith and Solway constituency, as will be at the next election. And prior to my election in 2019, I was an association chairman, leader of the Allerdale Conservative Group, deputy leader of Allerdale Borough Council, and a parish council chairman in my village, where I worked for 2 years until my first election, and then even harder to ensure re-election. And much of my local electoral success I attribute to initiatives around a cleaner, tidier village, as was running regular clean-up days around the Great British Spring Clean, for example, introducing flower beds and trees, organising bulb planting sessions. And particularly, I used the council's reporting mechanisms to my advantage to take ownership of residents' issues, report them, chase them, and report back. I wrote our 2019 local manifesto, which majored on cleaner, greener initiatives. And that year we took control in coalition. So I ensured that we kept on top of the areas we knew were regular issues so that people could see a difference between when we'd taken control and the previous administration. We increased the number of street scene officers, increased fines and reporting of individuals through the court processes. And while it might make uncomfortable hearing for some, we also started to take a much harder line on caravans pitching up on council and private land, which in some cases were partially the source and unfortunately were the cover for a lot of unscrupulous locals of hundreds of tons of fly tipping. One site in particular had 365 man days every year just to keep on top of it. And we failed miserably at that as well. So it was a really expensive issue. When we talk about limited resource, it was incredibly expensive for us and our contractor. It was a fight, particularly with other agencies such as the police, But with the determination of my replacement, who went on to become council leader, we've made much progress as we hand over to a Labour-controlled unitary council on April the 1st, where I hope that hard work isn't squandered. But I note that actually 3 boroughs that are becoming a unitary council in April, they've failed to harmonise fly tipping charges, and my borough, if you like, my district, is half the cost of fly tipping in the borough next door, even though they're in the same council. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, and I hope the hard work isn't squandered there. So following my election in 2019, I set up a grotspot campaign to follow through what I'd done as a councillor on a wider footprint. You can see that at grotspot.com, which just takes you to a page on my website, where I encourage residents to report things using photographs and a what 3 words location. And my office has built up a great relationship with local councils of all colours, I will say, to ensure that issues are dealt with in a timely manner. I then run hyper-local campaigns at a street level on a particular issue in some places, before then following up when it's done. So it's a really good campaigning tool, while also delivers something tangible for residents. Now, I realise that the power of the portcullis helps in getting some of those issues resolved, but I also have many wins as a local councillor. If you're determined to follow issues through, we mustn't underestimate the power of cleaner, greener streets and delivering something tangible, something that residents can see. We mustn't be afraid to promise, obviously, things that we can deliver, or at least be shown that we are trying to deliver. That's the key. If people can see that you're trying to do something, I think that is really key. So we mustn't underestimate that. Obviously, local elections coming up. I'm happy to obviously answer any questions tonight, but even follow-ups afterwards around what maybe councillors can do if they want some guidance on that. So I've probably taken more than my allotted time, so I'll hand back over to Kitty.
Thank you, Mark. That's really interesting to hear about, and I hope that some people pick it up in the questions so we can explore it a bit further. Going on to our next panelist, we have Councillor Martin Alvey. Martin is the portfolio holder for Environment and Climate Change at Cornwall Council, where he provides executive member leadership for the Council's Environmental Growth Strategy and Climate Change Action Plan. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Kitty, and thanks for inviting me to participate tonight. So Cornwall Council, some of you may already know, but we're one of the largest unitaries in the country, believe it or not, stuck down here in the southwest, covering a vast area which is predominantly rural. So, of course, our big challenge is around rural fly tipping, as well as the common urban challenges that others may also face. So as far as my portfolio goes, the public protection team sits under me, which includes our environmental protection and trading standards teams. The actual picking up of the rubbish actually sits with a cabinet colleague who looks after the neighbourhoods portfolio, which includes street cleansing and waste collection. But the important thing for today and what we're talking about being fly tipping, the enforcement of that sits with my team. So I'm sure that much of what I'm going to describe tonight, you and your own councils are already doing, but there might be some gems in there that you may wish to pick up on. So first of all, when those fly tips are reported, the collection of that rubbish is by our contractor Biffa, and built into the contract is the arrangement that Biffa, when they come to a reported fly tip, will photograph it, go through it to find any evidence they can as to the source of that fly tipping, and then they will hand that on to the enforcement team, who will then follow up any leads and hopefully try and find the perpetrator and get some sort of conviction out of it. Like most authorities, in addition to relying on reporting, in those common fly tipping spots, we deploy covert cameras, miniature covert cameras, and they've been successful in actually achieving convictions for us. I think one of the most successful things that we've done is a combined operation between the Environment Agency, the police, and the trading standards and environmental protection officers. What that's involved is going to an area in the county where we know there's a known problem of fly tipping, but we also know that there are cowboy waste collectors, white van men doing pickups. We kind of know who they are, but we don't have the evidence. So we'll set up in a large car park area. The police and one of our enforcement officers will go out and identify any vehicle that they think is suspicious, bring it back to the car park, and they will be checked for a waste transfer, whether or not that is being complied with. The Environment Agency will be checking out any environmental regulations they may be breaching. Trading standards will be checking out whether they're a legitimate firm or not. And from that, we've had several convictions, either the council have or indeed the EA, of road traders. And not only has obviously been successful in taking those people to task, it also has sent out a clear message. We've done media around the event. Local BBC radio have covered it. So that has been very successful in that multi-agency approach. So in terms of getting boots on the ground to enforce, as well as our council officers, we have devolved the ability of parish and town councils to train their officers to enforce littering and dog mess, which again has acted as a force multiplier, particularly in the towns. Parks and garden staff, for example, have been trained to enforce littering within the parks and gardens and the areas in which they work. Our parking enforcement officers, our council parking enforcement officers, are all multi-tasked and trained to enforce littering and to enforce dog mess. And a lovely little anecdote, because they also have body-worn cameras for evidence gathering. One of our parking enforcement officers recently ticketed somebody. The individual who had been ticketed gave the parking enforcement officer a mouthful of abuse, screwed the ticket up and threw it out the window. All caught on body camera. The parking enforcement officer also then issued him with a fixed penalty for littering, which he refused to pay. Went to the magistrate's court. Long and the short of it is it cost him a £2,000 fine, £500 costs and a victim surcharge, and he still had to pay his parking fine. So I think that's an example of a really hard hit, and the benefit of body-worn CCTV, body-worn cameras. And the final one I'd like to highlight, again, for all councils, money for enforcement teams is a challenge. We make as much use as we can of proceeds of crime, and between my trading standards and environmental protection teams in the last 12 months, we've actually brought in £90,000 in proceeds of crime actually back into the council coffers, which have gone directly into the enforcement team. So if you're not already doing it, that's something that you really need to get your officers thinking about, is whether or not, particularly when you get a fly tipper who you know they've been making a lot of money out of this for a long time, yeah, there's a good chance of getting a proceeds of crime against them, as well as any fine that a magistrate may levy. And the final thing that I'd highlight, publicity. All about publicity. Get your media team, whenever you get a conviction in court, get it all over social media, press release, make sure that the portfolio holder gets a good quote in there and really get the message out to the public that you're not tolerating it. So I think I've taken my 3 minutes, but I'm happy for any questions as we move along.
Thank you so much, Martin. We love it when a story has a happy ending. Next panelist we have is
Well, not happy for that individual, perhaps.
Happy for the council. Helen is the head of communications at Keep Britain Tidy, where she heads up the charity's marketing, communications, campaigns, and policy functions. Over to you, Helen. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, there we go. Can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me to come along this evening. I've never done one of these before with the Conservative Environment Network, so it's really, really lovely to meet you all virtually. As Kitty said, I head up our campaigns, communications, social media, policy work, and I've been with the charity for 13 years nearly. So I've been working in this world of litter, fly tipping and dog poo for a long time. I'm going to talk to you just in the 3 minutes that I've got. I'm hoping I can keep it to 3 minutes, just about Keep Britain Tidy, really, because I don't know how much people know or if they think they know about us, but maybe don't, because there's a lot of confusion out there about what Keep Britain Tidy is. We are actually an independent charity. We're not a campaign. We're not part of government. We're a wholly independent charity. And according to YouGov, we're also the country's best loved charity, which is nice. We've been around a long time. We were founded by the WI in the 1950s. The WI were very far-sighted women, and they saw that our patterns of consumption and where we consume was changing, and they were starting to notice, interestingly, a lot of glass being dropped in the environment, in the countryside. So they decided to do something about it, and they set up Keep Britain Tidy. Our remit, people think we do litter. Yes, obviously we're famous for litter. Our logo is, we call him Tidy Man, putting his rubbish in a bin. But our actual charitable purpose is to eradicate litter and waste, improve the quality of public spaces, and to support people to live more sustainably. And those were actually our charitable purposes back in the 60s. So we were actually quite a long way ahead of the curve when you come to talking about sustainable consumption. Now, we're not a very big charity. We have a very big brand. Our brand awareness is about 75% amongst the UK adult population, but we're actually not a very big charity in terms of the number of people that work with us. And we are not arrogant enough to think that we can solve these problems, these huge challenges, on our own. Though sometimes we do get blamed for the fact that we haven't solved them. Clearly, we can't do it alone. And so we work with councils, we work with businesses, we work with Aaron from Coke, who's here tonight. We work with other NGOs and charities that share our aims and objectives. We work with politicians. And we work with communities. And actually the biggest part of what we do is we work with communities and we work with councils. Because we need behavioural change in this country and we need systemic change. And our issues are not party political. We work across the party political divide. The last chair of our APPG was a Conservative MP. He got made a minister. And now we have a Labour chair of our APPG because it isn't party political. It affects everybody. No one likes litter. As well as the kind of things that you might see us for, which Great British Bin Clean's also already been mentioned tonight, and I will talk about that a little bit. We deliver eco schools, which is the country's largest sustainable schools programme, and the chances are wherever you are, there is at least one eco school in your patch. There's thousands of them. We deliver the Green Flag Award for parks and green spaces, the Blue Flag Award for beaches, and the Green Key Award for hospitality venues. And the chances are you've got Green Flag parks as well where you are. And then we need the public on our side. We need to work with the public. And one of the best ways of engaging them is around litter picking. I defy anyone who's ever done a litter pick to see the world quite the same way again once they've done one. So 8 years ago, we launched the Great British Spring Clean. Last year, we had 440,000 volunteers, including 170,000 children and young people, collecting almost 500,000 bags of litter. This year, we are up to 325,000, I think it was, when I last looked on the counter. And the campaign's only been going, well, it's been going less than a week. We launched on Friday. It is by far the biggest mass action environmental campaign in the country, and it would not be possible without the support of amazing local authorities. The common denominator for everything we do pretty much is local authorities. Our schools work, our parks work, our litter, waste, fly tipping, dog fouling, sustainable consumption is all done with and in support of local authorities, because local authorities are at the front line of all of this and have to deal with the consequences of it. We have a Centre for Social Innovation, which does a lot of research and develops insights, behavioural insights, and then translates those into solutions that can be delivered by local authorities and other partners in a very practical way. So it's all about sustainability. It's all about low-cost solutions that work. And I'm quite happy to talk about some of those in detail through the course of this, if people want to ask me about the specific thing. I'm not going to talk much more, except I'm going to just say this. I don't know if people read the Sunday Times last Sunday. There was a story in there about a litter picker who had taken waste in a car to a household waste recycling centre, where they were denied permission to dispose of the litter at the HWRC. They were told they couldn't do that without a licence and that they were in danger of being prosecuted. Now, that's not actually true, because in 2021, the Environment Agency changed the guidance to allow volunteers to be able to move waste without a waste carrier licence if it was from litter picking. But it is stories like that and those kind of, and they are occasional incidents that kind of almost pit volunteers against local authorities, and that is just not the way it should be. They contribute to this false narrative. They perpetuate this thing that councils don't care, and we know that's not true. Keep it tidy, we know that is not true. So if you only do one thing tonight as a result of this session, please go back to your councils and make sure that the volunteers in your patch are being supported, because they can be your greatest allies or your greatest critics, because they care more than anyone else about litter. And I actually know some councils that are really unpopular with volunteers because they don't support them, and we will hear about that. I also hear about the councils where they're doing it really, really well and supporting volunteers and encouraging them and facilitating them and actually building relationships and friendships which go year round. Please, please, please make sure that your councils are supporting your volunteers, because they are an absolutely vital part of the battle against litter. And I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Helen, and thank you also for taking the time out on what's presumably a very busy time at Keep Britain Tidy to celebrate the great.
It's a little bit busy.
And then over to our last panelist, but by no means our least panelist, is Aaron Patel. Aaron is the head of public affairs at Coca-Cola GB&I, and Coca-Cola has supported many anti-litter and cleanup initiatives across the country in partnership with various organisations, from NGOs to the government and various action groups. And I look forward to hearing what he's got to say. So over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Kitty, and it's a pleasure to be on such an esteemed panel and speaking to members of the Conservative Environment Network. So thank you again. And yes, you're right, we do have various partnerships with bodies such as yourselves, such as Keep Britain Tidy, but it's no it's a known fact that we are still, despite those initiatives and partnerships, we are still a widely littered brand, and there's no hiding away from it. And that litter costs you, local authorities, a lot of money to clean up. It blights the local area. It doesn't do anyone any favors in terms of attracting local businesses, local tourism. It doesn't make people feel proud in their area. So there's far more that we as Coke need to do. We do have a responsibility, but we do need help, frankly. Like Helen said, we keep Britain tidy. We cannot do this alone. We need help from the likes of NGOs such as Keep Britain Tidy to keep pushing and to keep challenging us. We need help from national governments, devolved governments and local authorities, as well as the public, to get the right infrastructure and to drive behavioural change, which is crucial. I think we've taken significant steps as a business. I think it's fair to say we as a big brand with scale, it is our responsibility to see, to ensure our packaging is as sustainable as possible, and we want to collect and recycle every bottle or can we put on the market by the end of the decade. But we also need to reduce the amount of packaging we use, be it plastic or be it aluminium. So the can Mark is drinking, when Mark, if you fill that can without the liquid, it's exceptionally light. Similarly with this plastic bottle, we've taken out, well, it's half the weight it used to be, which obviously has a business benefit, but it also has a significant environmental benefit. But food and drink is still important. It keeps our products safe. Packaging is food and drink packaging is still important. It keeps food safe. It reduces the wastage, and we all know food waste is a big problem. But we all know discarded packaging is taking its toll on the environment today. So we've done these innovative things like lightweighting, but we've also attached our caps before it's become into law, so it doesn't end up on your streets or Martin's wonderful beaches when it's separated from the bottle, as it often is. So small things like that certainly do help. And that bottle I just showed you contains 100% recycled content for the physical bottle. But recycling rates and collection rates are stagnating, and there's not going to be an increase in the amount of recycled content we can use for our larger bottles until there's a material change to the UK's recycling policy. Indeed, there remains a high shortage of high-grade recycled plastic, for example, and it means that bottle I just showed you, we have to rely on sources of recycled plastic from overseas because they have better infrastructure. And like I said, we cannot solve this alone. So we do welcome the government's decision to introduce a deposit return scheme in England and in Wales by 2025. It will give us a greater quality of recycled content to use in our bottles and cans, and help recycling rates and reduce waste and reduce litter, which we all know is a blight. And we know firsthand how brilliant these schemes can be when they work properly. Countries like Norway and Denmark have transformed recycling and contributed to the circular economy significantly, with as many as 9 in 10 bottles and cans collected and recycled, which is quite extraordinary. Now, success will be conditional on how well a scheme is designed across and how the schemes across the UK interact with each other. Mark mentioned it around harmonisation between fees for penalty fees for fly tipping between local authorities. It's absolutely crucial that harmonisation of schemes, deposit return schemes, exists across England, Scotland, Wales, and even the island of Ireland. We have an opportunity to become, I think, a world leader in the circular economy if we get it right in 2025. And it will attract investment in recycling facilities and the circular economy in general. We know we must step up as a business, as an industry, but making these proposals a reality will benefit the consumers, the retailers, we must work together to prepare for these changes as well, because communication, as mentioned before by Martin, is absolutely key when we introduce schemes like this. These are behavioural changes that will have to ultimately come from the consumer, and we need every one of us to work together to drive those behavioural changes to make sure any policy change around recycling and collection, including a deposit return scheme, is successful, because that's what it is. It's not just about making sure we collect every bottle and can. It's about ensuring that consumers know why they're doing it and driving the best outcomes for the environment.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you to all of our panelists for those introductory remarks. Picking up from some of the questions in the chat, the first question is from Donna, who quite rightly points out that there is a difference between litter and fly tipping, that by putting them in one webinar, I've not helped to make distinct points, but with that comes different motivations and causes of those two crimes. And so maybe taking litter first, it'd be great to hear from the panelists what you think some of the overarching causes are that lead people to litter, and how councils may be able to address those through their campaigns that they choose to run locally. Helen, would you like to start?
I mean, what time does this finish? I could talk about that for hours. Causes, why do people litter? Oh boy. There's lots of different reasons people litter, and lots of different situations in which they will do that littering, and that will vary from smokers who will litter because they have something that is on fire and stinks and they want to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and now there isn't always necessarily a solution there for them. Something we're doing a lot of work on at the moment, an awful lot of work. It is the most littered item by a country mile, cigarette butts, through to nighttime economy. So social norms change, and people's sense of right and wrong goes slightly out the window when they've had too much to drink. Littering from vehicles, it's an anonymised behaviour, very, very low chance of getting caught, and not incurring any judgment from others because you're in your little box and everybody else is in their own little boxes. And then there will be young people in littering, which is again different because that's to do with being perceived to break off from the group, and so if you go to put your litter in the bin, you're breaking off from the group, and there's quite strong psychological reasons why young people don't want to be seen as different from the pack, so to speak. So there are lots and lots of reasons, and it's different in different situations. Then you've got your whole polite littering, which is when people don't think they're littering because they're not actually throwing. You don't very often see people, apart from out of cars occasionally, you very rarely see people do blatant littering, i.e. I'm going to chuck that. Well, you do see an awful lot, and you walk around any town centre. The underground in London is, I notice it a lot at the bottom of the escalators. People very carefully place things on ledges, on windowsills, under park benches. That's a whole different type of littering. So they kind of move away from it rather than throwing it. So it really complicated, very different to the fly tipping. The drivers of fly tipping, completely different set of behaviours and behavioural drivers. But a lot of the work we do is trying to understand those, and then which levers to pull to influence behaviour. So what will motivate drivers not to throw their rubbish out the window? And actually one of the things is the impact on wildlife at the sides of the roads. Because what a lot of people don't realise, and we're trying to tell them, is that actually, particularly on motorways, weirdly enough, the verges of motorways are actually a really massive wildlife haven, because they're not touched. They never get pesticides put on them. They're very much left, and very, very few humans actually ever go on them. We chuck a lot of stuff on them, but we don't go on them very often. So there's a huge amount of wildlife that lives there. And we know that that's one of the motivators. So we've been doing some work on that, but there's lots and lots of things.
And thank you so much for that. It's very, very comprehensive description of the causes of litter. Wonder, Mark, when you have been promoting your Grot Spot campaign locally, what kind of approach have you taken, and have any of those causes of litter inspired the approach you've taken to market your campaign locally?
So to answer the latter part of that question first, I suppose any campaigning I've done around it, and we do regularly, it's on a loop, advertising on all my social media, for example, but it is fairly generic, unless I've specifically taken and I have to be honest that it is more potholes than any litter at the minute, because the roads are in a terrible state, but which of course leads to untidy streets because potholes create gravel, and so it is all interlinked. But no, I can't say I've done anything specifically around litter. Fly tip and hotspots, yes, but not necessarily litter. And I'd just like to go back over to the first question about why people litter. I just don't think we should make excuses for people. It's laziness. I hear all sorts about there aren't enough bins and everything else, but I think we just got to be quite honest that it is laziness from people. So
that's fair enough. And just looking through the chat, another question that's come up, and I know that Aaron spoke about it a little bit, is around deposit return schemes. And I suppose that feeds into a more national policy conversation on the introduction of a deposit return scheme in the UK, or indeed England, as the case may be currently. This will require councils to do a lot of communicating, I think, locally, to tell residents what to expect with this new scheme and how to promote it to ensure that the co-benefit, namely littering, or prevention of littering rather, actually occurs. So I would be interested to hear from Martin and also Aaron on their thoughts on the deposit return scheme and what this might mean locally for preventing litter. I'll start with Aaron.
Thanks, Kitty. So Bill's comment in the chat, which was very valid, about why don't Coke introduce deposits on our bottles, or cans? Well, because simply the consumer would move to a brand that doesn't have a deposit, which would be cheaper, and then it wouldn't reduce litter, which is what we're trying to do. So it has to be, the whole industry has to move, which is why we welcome deposit return schemes, and that will therefore generate the reduction in litter, because once you attribute that financial incentive to the consumer, they will not they'll be less inclined to litter, shall we say, and we've seen that from other markets, as I mentioned earlier. In terms of communication, look, in markets where deposit return schemes have gone live and they have been successful, we've seen the scheme take ownership of communications, but absolutely, I think anything that local authorities can do to supplement that would obviously be welcomed, because you have the wonderful reach and the understanding of your population that many don't.
Martin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm old enough to remember the Corona man coming around, and so back then, every bottle, pretty much every glass bottle, had a deposit on it, and I guess part of it is the cost of production of glass bottles has reduced so much that it no longer became a marketing necessity for the company in order to sell its product at a reasonable price to actually place a value on the receptacle itself. I'd certainly support it. I'd wish there to be proper extra burdens funding for local authorities to introduce it, though, and I think we must recognise the significant cost that would be involved in the introduction, and so that extra burdens funding would need to come from somewhere. One other thing I want to mention, something that if government introduced it, I wish actually the fast food takeaway industry would introduce it. Simple thing, drive-through takeaways, the drive-through pickup point, they should write the registration number of the vehicle that takes the item. That in itself would discourage people from throwing their Mackie D boxes or other takeaways are available boxes out of the car window when they've had their snack on the way home.
That is an interesting idea. Helen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, at this stage, no.
Sure thing. There's a question in the chat which I suppose goes to the idea around convenience of not littering and bin placement. And I know that the location of a bin can make or break the extent to which litter occurs often. And so is there any advice Martin and perhaps Helen can give to figuring out where the best places are to put bins locally?
Shall I go first? Well, for me, it's where you're finding a lot of litter dropped. So the start points in walks, the end points in walks, the stopping points in walks, places where people hang out, bus stops. So it's not rocket science to work out where people are leaving the litter. I think the challenge is to be able to educate people to then use those litter bins. And I think the point that Helen was making earlier on about cigarette butts, a litter picking churro over the weekend. I was talking to one of the people involved in it, and he was flabbergasted at the number of cigarette butts he ended up picking up. Most incidentally outside the doctor's surgery, but that's another story. But I think in people's minds, a cigarette butt isn't litter, and I think we need to get over that. They think of it as just a small, tiny item that that they can discard. They don't. I think they seriously don't see it as litter sometimes.
I know that a lot of people think that cigarette butts aren't plastic, which they are as well, which I think, yeah, general awareness raising will help. Helen, would you like to come in?
Yeah, on cigarette butts, yeah, smokers don't see them as litter in the same way that they see other forms of packaging as litter, and they don't know that they're plastic. They think they're biodegradable. They think they're made of cotton, so they think they biodegrade. And actually, that's reinforced in the media all the time. You see policemen throwing cigarette butts on TV programs and barristers and all kinds of people. It's actually socially normed in the media. So we have called that out on a number of occasions because it shouldn't be. In terms of bin placement, I'm not an expert on bin placement. I'll hold my hands up. But I do know and understand that if bins are not clean or are not emptied regularly, so they're starting to overflow, look a bit grotty, then people will not use them. It's that research has been done, and it is really important that bins are maintained and emptied regularly, because people don't want to touch that. There's a whole ick factor and they don't want to touch them. So, and having the right design of bins where people can put rubbish in without having to touch it, and also that they have a top on so that it doesn't blow out. In the case of Cornwall, probably so that seagulls don't get in there as well. But yeah, those really minor things, well, not really minor, because obviously there's a cost to doing all this stuff and making sure bins are clean, and also knowing where all the bins are, because sometimes I've heard of councils that don't actually know where all their bins are, so can't actually kind of go out and clean them and maintain them because they don't know where they are. So that even that basic kind of stuff is really important.
Martin, do you know where all your bins are?
I know where all the I personally don't know, but the council knows where all its bins are. But of course, a lot of the parish and town councils also have bins which they empty, so we don't necessarily know where all those are. How's
your weekend's plan sorted then, Martin? Next question is from Stephen, who is talking about county highways specifically, and says that you can't pick up roadside litter on these highways due to health and safety reasons, but this can be a big source of litter often. Can the panel suggest ways to deal with the littered roads as they need dealing with urgently? Would anybody like to comment on that?
If I'll come in there. I think on there is a point on motorways, roads that you don't normally walk along and wouldn't probably want to walk along either. There's an issue there, but I think most of the roads, certainly in my part of the world, even the A roads many of them have paths alongside, but regardless that have wide verges. And I've accompanied a number of, we can discuss whether it should or shouldn't be the way to do it, but I've accompanied a number of my constituents who regularly go out litter picking. I've got litter pickers and hoops and everything in my office that I lend out to community groups and others and councillors and such like when they're organising litter picks. And just to go back to the point before about people being stopped from taking bags of litter, my council are very, very good at organising with pickers a collection point. I have one guy who walks every single day, and I can tell you where his bags will be every day. They're picked up every morning, but that's his routine now. He does 3 or 4 hours, same route along an A road, picking up. We discuss whether that should be necessary or not, but it is certainly. So I think sometimes it's an excuse, limited resource and various other things. Health and safety is a good cover if someone doesn't necessarily want to do something, but those that want to do it find a way around, I would say.
Martin, did you have anything to add here on the highways point?
I think much as Mark has said, we do pick up on our highways where it's safe to do so. Otherwise, it's done as part of the annual sort of maintenance schedule. I think the other challenge, and something that we've cracked now but didn't previously crack, to make sure that when the verge is cut, that the litter picking contractor comes along immediately afterwards to pick up after the verge cutting. Particularly in Cornwall, the people cutting the verges are different to the people picking up the litter, so that we have to make sure that the two contractors are working in harmony with that. And I would say that Highways England are pretty good at picking up along our trunk roads. You actually see them out on the A30, which is dual carriageway, on the verge, picking up on a fairly regular basis. But Helen mentioned the risk to wildlife on highways verges. The other significant risk that we find, particularly in the summer, is actually a fire risk, combination of cigarette butts, but also glass bottles starting fires. And we had several verge fires last summer as a result of discarded litter.
Interesting. I know this is also something that has been raised in the context of disposable vapes that I know has gained some traction in Westminster and beyond. I wonder if anybody would like to comment on that, as I know that is becoming an increasingly annoying source of litter for people, at least on Twitter. Mark, I saw you nodding your head. Any thoughts on disposable vapes?
Well, I've backed Caroline Johnson's 10-minute rule bill on this, actually. Declared an interest as a member of the APPG vaping. I think vaping is a really useful tool to move people from smoking cigarettes and some of those other issues we have about. And I was a smoker for a long time, and thinking back, was probably guilty of flicking cigarette butts out of the van window back when I was on the tools. So yeah, I think. Just goes to show how habits change over time as well. But I am really concerned on a number of issues. These colourful vapes that are attractive to children. Children, of course, want to hide, and the reason that not just they're attracted to packaging, but they're cheap. They throw them away afterwards, so they don't have to take them home and get caught. Like some of us when we were children with cigarettes and lighters and whatnot. So I think, but they are becoming an increasing problem. I think they're becoming a problem as well, I've read, for recycling centres, because they're causing fires and batteries in them are causing issues. So it's something that we need to keep a close eye on. Now, I'm not, as a Conservative, I am not generally in favour of reaching for a ban as the first port of call. I'm not generally in favour of making life more expensive or more difficult for constituents. But I think we've got a real problem here. The people who may not have smoked are attracted to them, and that's causing other knock-on effects. So I think we've got to take that on board and see what we can do to prevent it becoming a huge problem.
Definitely, thank you so much.
I would just have the other thing as well that causes a major headache is these little canisters of nitrous oxide. We find them everywhere, and there used to be little ones, and now we're seeing bigger ones. We used to find little ones in dozens, and now we're finding bigger ones as well. So that's another problem we need to keep an eye on.
Helen, are these on your radar, and do you have any top tips for councillors looking to tackle this problem locally?
Yeah, they are on our radar. They're from being not a litter problem 2 years ago. They are up there now in the top 10 most littered items by presence or absence of them. I think the problem is there's the kind of how to deal with them hasn't really caught up with the kind of the way they've kind of become such a big thing. They're different to smoking related litter. They're more like littering of bottles or packaging of any other kind. But there is a danger to them for volunteers picking them up. So we need a solution to get them recycled, because not only are they kind of a danger, they're also a resource. They contain lithium, they contain their batteries. So really they should probably come under the WE. And so if you sell them, like with batteries, you need to take them back, and we need to get them recycled and the resources that are within them back into the system. And I think that's probably where that needs leadership from the centre, because it has happened so fast and there is no mechanism for it currently, and the local authorities don't know what to do with them. So I think there is something that needs to happen there to facilitate the recycling of those.
Yeah, it's becoming a very big issue, I'm sure. Mark, Sen is on hand to help you tackle this in Westminster. I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll have time for 2 more questions. One is drawing on what Martin said in his opening remarks, and perhaps pairing it with Aaron, is the role of partnerships in tackling these issues. Coca-Cola as a partner, and Martin, you mentioned also lots of local partners. For local councillors on the call who are looking to make such partnerships, do you have any top tips on how they can go about making these partnerships? Aaron, would you like to go first?
Sorry, just trying to come off mute. So I guess in terms of local authorities specifically, we have the Coca-Cola Foundation, which is our foundation arm, as the name suggests. And we often have funding cycles to work with parties like Hubbub, for example, and we encourage the last round actually was 4 local authorities bidding for innovative recycling facilities near waterways, and we've awarded funding to 4 local authorities that came up with sort of innovative pitches to encourage people to put their cans and bottles in the recycling bin that the foundation part funds with actually fully funds with Hubbub doing the execution with the local authority. So that's a small example of how we partner with local authorities on a broader scale. Look, we've worked with brands like Keep It and Tidy, and we're working with yourself, Kitty, to sort of promote policies that will help us reduce litter and collect everything that we put onto the market. But also, I think it's vital that we continue talking to each other, continue having a dialogue and just understanding what the concerns are for local authorities, because at the moment it's you guys who pick up the tab, and that's simply not fair, and hence why we support interventions like deposit return schemes. So continue to talk to us, I guess.
Martin, any top tips for getting partnerships for your local authority?
I think if you can find a type of litter or source of litter that there's a common hatred of, for want of a better term, I think that can stem a partnership. And I'll give you an example of cheap surfboards that people will go down to Cornwall, go to the local supermarket and buy a £10 polystyrene surfboard that will probably break the second time they use it, and they'll leave it on the beach. And we've had a massive problem of these being discarded on beaches across Cornwall. One of our villages, big seaside area called Bude up in North Cornwall, they got together in partnership with all of the shops that sold these boards, and they agreed to stop selling the cheap boards and instead only sell the higher quality ones, but also offer a rental service. So anyone coming down on holiday could either rent a board, or they would have to buy a sort of a high quality one. And it caused so much interest that it was featured on the Joe Lycett came down to Bude and did a thing on it. And we're now trying to get other coastal towns to take this on board. So it's focusing on a particular type of litter that you can get a group of people to coalesce around preventing.
Thank you. And now I notice we've got 2 minutes to go, so I'm going to go to every panelist and ask, with the local elections coming up very quickly, what is your sort of go-to advice for councillors on the call for talking about littering and fly tipping on the doorstep? Martin, would you like to go first?
So first of all, we're fortunate in Cornwall in that we haven't got any local elections in May. We're on a 4-year cycle, so 2025 are our next local elections. But to those that are out campaigning, I think first of all, it's to get an understanding of whether this is one of the major concerns to your residents, and to ask them about it. But to actually ask them what sort of community action they would support if you were to promote it. So would they help support litter picks? Would they help support a campaign as such? But also to try and talk as much as you can, not just to the voters, but also try and engage with the younger people in your community, the schools and such like. And pester power from children will really help. So make it clear that you're also engaging with young people who are not necessarily going to vote for you, but their parents might.
Aaron?
Well, highlight that it's this government that has pledged to introduce a deposit return scheme, which I think has over 70% of public support, and it is this government that will pledge to support it. So it's your party.
Helen?
I don't really know. I'm not. We're not political, so I'm quite. What I said at the beginning is that if you do one thing, support your volunteers, because they're out there. Like Mark said, he's got someone who does 3 or 4 hours every day. They're doing it not for reward, but because they care. And I think we all care about this issue, whatever you're. Oh, and yeah, and just to remind everybody on this that we can all see the chat. So thanks very much.
And Mark, final word to you.
Yeah, thanks. I think if people were raising it on the door, then that would suggest to me there was a local issue that I'd be trying to understand further, and trying to engage new volunteers, trying to, as I said before, take up that work on their behalf, that issue on their behalf. I realise that can be difficult when people are still just candidates and still trying to fit in work and canvass and everything else, but try and take up that issue, be seen to be doing something, follow. It's a really good campaigning opportunity. Someone raises an issue on the door, it's a really good campaigning issue to take it away, use the council's reporting tools, report it, and then follow up with a letter to the resident to say what you've done and how you'll keep an eye on it. And you'll be amazed at how far little things like that go to getting people to vote for you, including those who you may not at first think might.
And with that, thank you everybody for joining us for tonight's webinar. Thank you to our panelists, Mark, Martin, Helen and Aaron. This has been a really useful discussion, and I will be following up with everybody who's attended with a recording and with an updated version of our briefing for local authorities on this topic. Thank you all so much, and see you all soon at the next webinar. Bye-bye.